Hi, this is Professor Poyo, and we will be covering today Chapter 2, Learning About Reading and Literature. In the beginning of this chapter, the authors of our textbook distinguish the difference between learning about literature and learning about teaching reading. If you're going to be an effective teacher, you will need to know the pedagogy of teaching reading, which you will obtain in another course. This course, however, is designed to help you gain a broad base of quality literature appropriate for teaching reading as well as other content areas. The texts that you discover in this course will be resources you may use to help your students progress in phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, writing, science, social studies, and even math. To present a brief introduction to the reading process, the authors discuss two prevalent approaches. The phonics-based instructional approach is grounded on the premise that children learn to read by progressing from letter names to letter sounds, and then to words. In this instruction, meaning is last, and the real emphasis is on decoding words. Advocates of a meaning-based instruction, however, place comprehension and meaning-making as central to the reading process. They indicate children use oral language skills, structure of the English language, and their prior knowledge for comprehension. Phonics is a strategy used when comprehension fails. The authors of this text subscribe to a combination of both instructional practices. Children learn about books by experiencing them. When you hand a book to a child, observing their behavior with the book reveals much about the child's readiness for reading. Does the child know how to hold the book? Does he know where to begin reading the book? Does the child begin reading letters, words, and sentences? Does he read from left to right and top to bottom? Does the text make sense? All of these questions address concepts of print and reveal the child's inclinations with the text. These resources will be players in your classroom, instrumental for engaging your students, piquing their interests, and motivating them to become lifelong learners. Children need the reading strategies, the motivation, and the practice that literature provides to develop fully in the area of literacy. The reading process is developed differently in each child. Children learn to read at different rates, depending on factors such as exposure to a print-rich environment, or being read to at an early age. Even experiencing a wide variety of text genres, and then, of course, whatever their own innate abilities are. How you choose to approach teaching with literature will be influenced by your own philosophy of learning. However, educators must practice within the parameters set by your specific school, district, and or even your state. Accountability is demanded in the teaching profession, and government agencies mandate policies based on research and based on data. No Child Left Behind is one such legislation requiring mandatory testing of students in grades 3 through 8. Comparing data nationally to determine achievement gaps, both within demographic groups as well as geographic locations. These test scores become public knowledge as schools receive report cards based on scores received by their students. Those schools with low-achieving students are then given sanctions, which may include allowing parents the opportunity to enroll their child in a school of their choice. The curricular area that is of most concern to stakeholders is reading. Researchers have been monitoring reading achievement as well as reading habits of young people for years. The National Endowment for the Arts, or the NEA, has reported this data, as you can see right here. We note a steady decline in reading across all age groups, and while the 2004 report indicated this correlated with an increase in technology, there certainly have been many other factors with contributing roles. The 2008 report brings hope in an increase of young adult reading with a utilization of technology and an increase of fiction reading among adults. Regardless of what trends the data may appear to be reporting, there's still a subculture of readers who are very resistant to literacy. The categories of resistant readers are varied, but include the good to average reader, the struggling reader, the minority student, the English language learners, and even boys. Pretty much the good to average readers, they think that reading is just boring, and perhaps you were one of these resistant readers. I know when I was younger, I had a very difficult time with reading. Part of it was because I wasn't that great of a reader. I was just an average reader, and so it took me a very long time. And I didn't have a lot of role models either who were showing me what reading was all about. Struggling readers, for them, reading is very difficult because they're not automatic decoders. In other words, they look at text and they're extremely slow because they don't have automaticity with the words. They don't have a large collection of sight words or even a large collection of vocabulary for that matter. Minorities, pretty much what ends up happening with them is the teacher's perceptions sometimes come in play here. They're a factor in the sense that they may look at minorities and automatically assume that they're not good readers. Or perhaps specific instructional techniques don't necessarily work for them. Socioeconomic status can play a part, as well as cultural priorities and self-perceptions. They may view themselves as bad readers. And then English language learners are also a category of resistant readers because, again, there's a lot of unfamiliar text for them and they have a very weak vocabulary. The last category here of resistant readers includes boys. And oftentimes we look at the majority of teachers are women. And sometimes we, as women, end up selecting text that is predominantly female. Perhaps it's narrative, not necessarily informational text. That's something that's really becoming big in the area of literacy is informational text. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but with Common Core becoming a part of everyday life for schools across the whole entire country, we're seeing that informational text is playing a bigger part here. So that's good. That's a positive in the sense that perhaps now boys will be less of resistant readers in the sense that we need to know who they are, we need to know what their interests are, and just try as best we can to help them find selections that are interesting to them. So how do we inspire our students to read and become aware of the power that literature has to inform, to entertain, to educate, and to even change us? How do we create a habit for reading? I bet that you can even think of books right now off the top of your head that you read that actually entertained you. Maybe you laughed, maybe you cried, maybe they educated you and informed you. I know I had books that even changed my whole perspective of life in general, but even specifically, perhaps made me more aware of other people's perspectives. So how do we end up doing that? How do we create a habit for reading? I want you to think about what strategies could be used to engage readers, and specifically these resistant readers. That's something that you'll need to make sure that you have an answer for, in the sense that look at each of those categories and ask yourself, okay, so what can I do to help engage them, to help motivate them, to help, like this says right here, create a habit for reading. Regardless of a student's reading ability, promoting reading is often a matter of helping them select appropriate reading material. I want you to take a few minutes to learn about how to help your students select a book that's just right for them. I've selected a video here of real live students, and they are basically they've been taught how to pick or how to select a text, and there's a mnemonic that they use here, which you can see, the I, they're the ones who choose the book, they're the ones who look at the book. The P stands for purpose. They look at a book and say, okay, right off from the start, what's my purpose for reading this book? Another question that they ask themselves, the second I here, is interest. They ask themselves, as they're looking at the text, am I interested in this? Is it something that I will want to read about? And then the C stands for comprehend. When you teach your students to open up a book, look at one page, start reading it, and ask themselves whether or not they understand what they just read. So have them just read a short selection of a book that they think they want to read, that they think they're interested in, and go ahead and give it a shot. You know, right smack in the middle of the book, take a little passage, read it, does it make sense? And if it doesn't, then that's probably not a good fit book. And then the K stands for know. Do I know all the words? In other words, that passage that I just read, are there a lot of words there that I don't understand? In other words, it's vocabulary that's not familiar to me. And if that's the case, if there's a lot of words I do not know, then that's not a good fit book for me. However, if I do know all the words, then most likely that would be a great book for me to choose to read as independent reading. So let's take a brief look at this iPick video. I hope you enjoy it.
Interest, do I like it? C, comprehend, do I understand? Comprehend, do I understand? Hey, no, do I know most of the words? No, do I know most of the words?
Okay, so don't be surprised if that song continues playing in your head for quite some time. Hope you enjoyed it. Generally, texts may have a reading level attached to them. For example, a number or a letter that helps a student determine the difficulty of the text. The text structure, syntactic length, and vocabulary difficulty are usually measured and considered the text's readability. Although there are several measures that may be used to determine a text's readability, and these measures may vary, producing different ratings, if you instruct your students using one scale and keep to that scale, there should not be confusion. Conceptual difficulty is another factor to consider when assisting students in text selection. Conceptual difficulty pertains to the complexity of ideas in a text. Symbolism, abstraction, and figurative language are all contributors to this. As was stated at the beginning of this chapter, it's critical that you know your students, know their interests in order to help encourage their reading. There are many ways of gaining this information, including watching them, talking to them, asking them questions, or even having them complete some sort of a survey or a questionnaire regarding their reading interests and even their reading habits. This is called a reading interest inventory, and it's actually something that I'm going to ask you all to find and put up on Blackboard for us. Another way of dealing with students who may be resistant readers is an incentive program. Now, many of you may have had experience with some sort of a reading incentive program in your own school. I know at the school that I taught at in Raleigh, North Carolina, we did have that Pizza Hut Book It program. And the students really enjoyed, reading books in order to get some reward, which in that case was pizza. But regardless of what you decide to do, if you want to you can use your own incentive program within your classroom. But like I said, you may end up walking into a school or a district that already has some sort of incentive program set up. I'm trying to think of the other one, Accelerated Reader. I think students in the past have been familiar with that. And it's funny because when we would talk about Accelerated Reader in class, I always had some students who loved it and other students who absolutely hated it. So just remember that if you decide to choose an incentive program, there probably is not one out there that everybody in your class is going to enjoy. So if you have maybe a couple of them, and you do, one incentive program at a time, that might be a better way of meeting the needs of all of your students, or at least interests of all of them. But anyway, incentive programs are good because they help you even, work towards a personal goal or maybe even a class goal. All right, so hopefully this chapter has been beneficial for you. Make sure that you do all of the text reading, all right? Chapter 1, Chapter 2, and then the next 2 chapters for next week are actually at the end of your book. We're skipping around a little bit because it's really important for you to get an understanding early on of ways of using these books. Children's literature, these amazing, great quality books are wonderful, but quite honestly, you're not going to have enough time in your day to read a book just for the sake of reading the book. You're always going to be looking for a twofer, is what I call it. How can I use this book? I want them to be exposed to this literature because it's amazing, but I also have all of these standards and objectives that I need to meet. So in the next 2 chapters, which is week 2, you'll see different ways of being able to incorporate this good quality literature, these trade books, into your content area. So be thinking about that, and make sure you check everything on Blackboard, your discussion board, and the blog as well. All right, God bless you. Have a great day.